My name's Paul Bestall, and you're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. The world is a possibility, if you'll only try. Welcome back to Mysteries and Monsters. Throughout history, tales and myths of giant birds and flying monsters have been with us for thousands of years. Cultures from all around the world, from ancient Egypt to Norse mythology, from the Aztecs to the Chinese, all refer to tales of giant birds and flying monsters. Yet many of us can also point to an infamous picture of an alleged pterodactyl that had been killed by soldiers during the mid-19th century, only for us to discover later that it had been a clever hoax. Despite this fascination about giant birds, long-lost flying dinosaurs and strange cryptids in the skies have continued to be reported from all over the world. We know that giant birds did exist thanks to the fossil record. So is it beyond the realms of possibility that somewhere a lost population still exists? If not, what are people seeing in the skies? It is this subject that has brought us to the new small-town monsters film, Terror in the Skies, and I'm delighted to welcome back Seth Breedlove to Mysteries and Monsters to discuss the new film. I've been fortunate enough to see the new film, and it is exactly what we've come to know and love from the Small-Town Monsters crew. With stunning artwork from Sam Sheeran and Lyle Blackburn's trademark narration, it's the full Small-Town Monsters package. Featuring interviews with Lauren Coleman, Ken Gerhard and Tobias Wayland amongst others, we're treated to a film which looks at the three key modern type of sightings: giant birds, flying dinosaurs, and mysterious humanoid-shaped cryptids in the skies. It's released this Friday on the 7th of June, so make sure you check it out through the Small-Town Monsters website and Amazon Prime. Don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or however you're downloading the podcast. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube, so please follow, share and support us. Our Patreon site is also available to support us from just $1 a month. So now, let's cast our eyes to the skies as I speak with Seth about the new Small-Town Monsters film, Terror in the Skies. I am delighted to welcome our first return interviewee with Seth Breedlove to discuss his upcoming new film, Terror in the Skies. Since the time of Sinbad and his battles against the giant bird known as the Roc, tales of giant birds and mysterious flying cryptids span the globe. From pteranodons in Africa to giant bats and birds in the Pacific to sightings of thunderbirds across the Americas, the stories of giant flying creatures are universal in culture. The new Small-Town Monsters film dives into this fascinating account. Seth, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And as a disclaimer for your listeners, I'm in my office. My microphone is gone, and my office overlooks a town square. And there is a giant clock outside of the window that this is no joke. It plays music on the hour, every hour, usually for at least a minute and a half, 2 minutes. So if suddenly Singing in the Rain starts playing in this weird like mall music kind of version, that's what's happening.
Excellent. Something to look forward to.
Yeah, definitely.
So, new film, released 7th of June, I believe.
Yeah.
Terror in the Skies. Thank you for letting me view it prior to release. I was really blown away more than anything. I just love the intro because the way the atmosphere builds at the beginning is very reminiscent for me as a massive geek towards something like a Godzilla film, with the thundery skies and cloud formations and everything. And then obviously you dive straight into the vistas of Chicago. It's just stunningly beautiful to that opening few minutes. It just looks amazing.
Awesome. Yeah, you're one of the first people I've gotten to talk to actually after showing them the movie. So yeah, the actual, like the prelude to the credits is something that I had actually envisioned like pretty much immediately when we came up with this movie. Sort of from the beginning, that the movie was going to begin with that sequence with the little boy in the barn and the Thunderbird, and I even had the idea of the reflection in his eye showing a Thunderbird flying across the sky. I wasn't sure how on earth we were going to do that effect on a $0 budget, but it came across well, and the movie has some strong Spielberg influences on it for sure, which is cool because he's one of my favorite directors.
Well, it should be one of everybody's favorite directors, to be honest. He's certainly always had an eye for a giant scope, and as obviously you see, especially in something like Close Encounters, it's the size of the visuals and what he's trying to represent there. I think that's as impressive as the actual story sometimes.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny you mentioned Close Encounters because that is the movie. Well, weirdly enough, there's two movies that visually really influence the look of Terror in the Skies, and one of them is Close Encounters, and strangely, the other one is not a Spielberg movie. It's Hitchcock's North by Northwest.
Yes.
And I have no idea why that particular movie played any kind of role in the visuals of Terror. But when Zach and I were talking originally about what the look of the movie would be, that was what I kept showing him, were stills from the sort of the ending, or not the ending, but the airplane sequence in North by Northwest. So we talked a lot about Hitchcock and Spielberg during the making of the movie. But at the end of the day, honestly, the visuals of Terror in the Skies were luck, more than anything, just because you have no control over what the skies are going to look like. You have no control over what the weather's going to be when you're there. The worst thing that could have happened on this particular movie would have been if we would have gotten into a position where when we arrived in Illinois, there had been just sort of gray skies, which was never the case. It was always, there was, I would have loved some storms in there, but we never really got to see any large storms while we were in Illinois. But yeah, the look of the movie is very, very much me leaning on my growing up with Spielberg, and it's cool too. Close Encounters of the Third Kind is a big influence on the writing of Momo, which comes out later this year. So this is the year that STM just apparently pays homage to Spielberg.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Strangely enough, I watched North by Northwest over the weekend. It's my favourite Hitchcock film, and it was on UK TV, and I just love Cary Grant in that film. It's just incredible. Yeah, no,
I my mom raised me on Hammer Horror, the Marx Brothers, which I never really mentioned, but it's always Hammer Horror, the Marx Brothers, Hitchcock, and Ray Harryhausen. And Hitchcock, Strangers on a Train, I watched that as a kid, and I watched Rope, and Vertigo's my personal favorite Hitchcock movie, but I could do a whole podcast just about Hitchcock, really.
Yeah, very true. It's quite different because I think this particular subject matter is probably one that, when you talk about it in cryptozoological circles and things like that, some people just tend to dismiss this subject completely out of hand, straight away.
Sure.
Was that a challenge when when you're planning these films, when you looked at the subject matter, Seth? Is it something you went, ooh, this could be a bit iffy?
I need to get better about that, strangely enough, because I feel like I don't ever consider like the commercial the commercial value of a project. And I was just like, I had always kind of written off the Thunderbird thing myself as being, sort of absurd. And I don't consider myself a huge fan of like flying humanoid stories and that kind of thing. I love Mothman and the West Virginia story, but the Thunderbirds and that never really had piqued my interest until I read. It was actually during some of the preliminary research for Mothman Legacy. I was reading some work of Mark Hall that Lauren Coleman had told me to check out. And I found that I did have a fascination with Thunderbirds, and then it's kind of grown since we started making this movie. And I'm to the point now where I could totally buy into the idea of Thunderbirds being a real thing. Just because, if you write out some of the less or some of the more fanciful ideas of what a Thunderbird might be, you're basically just left with an abnormally large bird, which to me is totally, I can buy into that. I could see that being a realistic cryptid. So, but as far as like, I mean, you have to educate. The problem with something like Terror in the Skies versus something like On the Trail of Bigfoot or Minerva Monster or Boggy Creek Monster is you have to. So much of it is education. Like you're educating people on the phenomenon itself, because most people aren't even aware. Like a general audience is not aware of flying humanoids and cryptids and flying cryptids and things like that. They might have some familiarity with Bigfoot because of pop culture, but they have no idea about Thunderbirds. So you spend a lot of time on a project like this just educating the general audience as to what the subject actually entails.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've always found fascinating, primarily because it's one of those subjects that, once again, that creatures such as giant eagles existed in the fossil record. We know they existed.
Yeah.
And we, obviously we still have fairly sizable birds. I mean, your wandering albatrosses are enormous. Your Andean condors are enormous. Obviously, we've still got things like ostriches running about, despite the fact they're flightless. So, for me, it's always been, like you referred to there, once you sort of trim it down, what you are essentially talking about is a freak giant bird. That is it. And that's not beyond the realms of possibility.
Right. Yeah, that's what appealed to me about it, actually. And then there were the little strange sort of similarities or synchronicities, if you want to use that suddenly overused word that the paranormal community has decided they adore. There were some strange synchronicities between Alton, Illinois, and Point Pleasant that kept coming up, and even leaving out Point Pleasant, there were some weird things that popped up that strangely sort of connected Thunderbirds and cryptids with just sort of Alton history. Like it's a town that is known for birds. Like when you go to the town and go to their visitor center, there's eagles everywhere, and the eagle, like pictures of eagles and paintings of eagles, and they're positioned directly next to giant murals of the Piasaw bird and paintings of the Piasaw bird, and they have town T-shirts that say, Alton, Illinois, and the Piasaw bird is on the T-shirt. So it's just kind of strange how their legends sit next to their known sort of animals so easily. And then there's also the fact that the town is known as the guy's name completely escapes me now, but at one time the tallest man in the world lived in Alton.
Robert Ludlow?
Oh God, I can't even speak anymore. Robert Ludlow. Yeah. How is it? What is the last name?
Ludlow. I think I pronounce it Ludlow. That's always been my
Ludlow.
I could be completely wrong, Seth. But
no, I think you're right.
He's one of those things. He's one of those people that it's all down to the Guinness Book of Records. I know who that is.
Right. Yeah. No. So I just thought it was cool. I thought that was a nice, strange synchronicity. God, I hate myself already for using this word so much. Between that and then sort of the idea that, well, maybe like Robert Wadlow, maybe there was just this massive bird, that flew through Alton in the 1940s and was seen by a number of people. But I mean, the entire subject of winged cryptids is strangely present in that state, in the prairie state, and I don't know why that is. It is a state that seems to like birds, and even when we went down to shoot Momo a few weeks ago, we had to drive through. I mean, you drive through the entire state of Illinois, and actually, we're only as the crow flies, you're probably only 45 minutes from Louisiana to Alton, if you go down the river. So we were very close to where we'd been before, and coming over, crossing over the Illinois River into Missouri from Illinois, there was a giant, some sort of nature refuge or something like that. It's a state-run nature preserve, and there on the side of the road was a massive, sign that said Illinois. I forget what it was. I forget the actual name of the place, but there was just birds all over the sign, and it puts you in the mindset that, like, this is a place that I'm not indicating that every single person in the state of Illinois has had a Thunderbird sighting, but they've definitely sort of, as a state, they seem to have embraced birds, giant birds or not, but they like their eagles in that state.
Yeah, it is interesting because, to be fair, I didn't know much about Alton at all, and it's interesting that you refer to the similarities with Point Pleasant, because it seems a very similar town. The whole feel of it, the way it looks. I think when you're doing one of the shots, when you're talking about some of the sightings, it's very reminiscent to the TNT area outside Point Pleasant. There's like some kind of giant cement factory on the river.
Sure, yeah. I think the biggest difference between the two seems to be that Alton is thriving. I don't think that is a town that I would point to and say it's in dire straits or anything like that. It's one of the probably most successful, at least to my eye, small towns that we've been to lately. And whereas Point Pleasant, you can definitely see they've seen some better days, but the history of the two, leaving out anything seemingly paranormal or supernatural, and you still are left with startling similarities between the two towns. They're both river communities. They both have that sort of history that relates to Native Americans, and they've both seen their fair share of local tragedies. Like the flooding is another similarity between the two. But then when you bring in something like their winged bird history, it is interesting that they are so similar in so many different ways. And like Troy Taylor, who we interviewed in the film, and is sort of a renowned author and ghost hunter. Or I don't even think he would refer to himself as that, though. Historian of ghosts, however you want to put it. But he refers to Alton as the most haunted town in America. And I've heard people toss that around relating to Point Pleasant as well. So however you want to connect the two, and we don't, in the film, we're not trying to draw any parallels between Point Pleasant and Alton relating to, being some sort of magnet for like winged cryptids. We're not doing that at all, but we are pointing out, at least, and really when I say we, I guess Troy is pointing out that there are similarities you can't really just overlook.
Yeah, very true. I mean, that's another point at the beginning of the scene, is because Illinois is one of those states, I think, that outside of America, it's probably, other than Chicago, nobody knows anything about Illinois, really.
Right.
And so when you're looking at some of the vistas that you're using in the film, it is a stunningly beautiful place with a really varied geography and topography.
That was such a happy accident too. The storytelling device that we use in this film it differs from something like The Bray Road Beast or some of the other movies where we broke it up into chapters like Beast of Whitehall. In this one, it's broken into 3 sections. Each section is sort of informed by the geography of where it takes place. So, the first chapter is Southern Illinois, the second chapter is Central, and the third chapter is Northern Illinois. And that all came about in the editing of the movie, just kind of finding that device and thinking that would be a nice way to sort of tell that story. So I was actually stunned with how the geography changed. And honestly, when we filmed Momo, we saw it on an even larger scale because when you head further west, when we did Momo, or Terror in the Skies, you're more down on the southern direct southern sort of border of Illinois. And when we made Momo, you had to drive from clear from the western part of the state or eastern part of the state to the western part of the state, and down. So you're kind of moving at an angle that gives you a much better view of what the entire state sort of looks like and how that topography changes. And when we got down into that Mississippi River Valley, the Illinois River Valley, that's where I was really stunned by, at one point Troy Taylor says there's mountains in Illinois. And when he said that, I had never seen any evidence of that until we were making Momo and we had to drive down to Missouri, and then I was like, oh, there legitimately are like mountains in Illinois. It's a strange thing to see. Here in Ohio, we would refer to them as foothills.
Yeah.
And obviously in a place like North Carolina, or Colorado, they would laugh at them as being mountains, but they're mountainous. I mean, they're definitely not hills. So that was cool. And it's just you're right. Like I actually hope that this acts as a really good introduction for viewers to the state itself, to the state of Illinois.
Yeah, I mean, I was blown away because, like I say, I know more than probably your average outside American about little things like that because obviously it's a place I'm very interested in, and I like the uniqueness of each state. Seems to be very individually unique compared to some of its neighbours, and Illinois is one of those. But I was really, really surprised. I just didn't expect it to look like that, especially in the south, like you say, because it seems to have just become more of a wetland, which you wouldn't associate with a state like that where it is.
No, and there's that, and then there's the bluffs and all that kind of stuff. The bluffs themselves don't even look like something you would find. It's a bizarre. It's almost like a bipolar state. It's like the state itself is bipolar because it changes so drastically and so quickly. You're driving across those central plains, and it is flat to the point where you see to the horizon. It's just flat prairie land, and then all of a sudden you find yourself, down in a valley with the Mississippi River stretching out, miles away from you. So it was eye-opening, especially for me. I've traveled a lot, across the country, and whether or not that the change in terrain would play into, some sort of large bird, existing in that state, I'm not sure. I don't know how to. The thing I came away from this wondering is how Illinois has become so renowned for winged cryptids, because it's obviously those southern parts of the state are in love with bald eagles and the eagle and birds and things like that. But the central part of the state is so flat It doesn't strike you as a place that would be very welcoming for a massive, bird with a 20-foot wingspan that could somehow stay hidden.
Very much so. I mean, obviously, when you begin in the film, I love that pictograph of the Piazza bird. It's jaw-droppingly stunning.
Yeah, are you talking about the actual mural?
Yeah, it's incredible. Obviously, it's a modern interpretation, isn't it? Because as you mentioned in the film, I think the original was destroyed for cultural reasons. I think that's the politest way we could describe it.
Yeah, I mean it's actually been destroyed twice, I believe, and then recreated twice. So it's and it seems to be a bit of a bone of contention between some researchers like Ken Gerhard and others like Troy Taylor, which one takeaway from the movie should be that in the paranormal world, no one ever agrees on anything. So like, because you've kind of got Ken and Troy going back and forth a little bit about like whether or not the Piasa bird was a winged cryptid or not, and then you get into the Illinois, the Chicago stuff, the Chicago Mothman stuff, and everyone is disagreeing with everyone else about whether or not there's anything to any of it. So yeah. I mean, there is a historical scope to Terror in the Skies that hasn't been present necessarily in our other films, not to the degree that it's present in Terror. It is history itself is a character in Terror in the Skies from the very first frame until the final frame. And at the end of the movie, it really is a message about history and not forgetting our history and things like that. So there's I told someone recently that the two movies we put out this year so far, Terror in the Skies and On the Trail of Bigfoot, are probably the most Seth Breedlove productions that STM's ever done. They just have, On the Trail of Bigfoot has that because of the fact that it's me narrating and I'm in it. Yeah. And Terror in the Skies is that because I tend to be a sentimental schmaltzy fool, and Terror in the Skies has a lot of like sentimental. It's wearing a lot of that on its sleeve, I think.
Yeah, but I think it's also good because it's very easy to think that this kind of subject's a modern phenomenon, Seth. And sure. Something that you obviously touched, as you mentioned there with the Bigfoot series, you have done it in the past where you've touched on the actual history of the area. In other films that you've done as well, you've also gone back into the actual history of the area. Oh yeah. Past the modern, understanding of that area, and it's I don't know, capitalist change from obviously being settled and built up. So, but once again, it's one of those that has its roots in Native American tradition. These stories have always been there. It's just that more people live there now.
Sure, and I think what's different too about this one is that it lives in that history. Terror in the Skies sort of dwells in that history, whereas the other movies we touch on the history and then we move on. I don't feel like Terror in the Skies necessarily ever gets away from talking about the past. And like we've touched on historical, the history of places in our prior films. Obviously it's a huge part of what we do, but usually it's touched upon, then we move on to the next, the first sightings and things like that. And Terror in the Skies starts with, I mean, you're 20 minutes into the movie before you get to the 1940s, because we spend so much time on the Piasa bird and, the sort of the history of Alton and the surrounding area. And also, I mean, the history of our main people, our main subjects. You learn about Troy Taylor and his past, and you learn about a little bit about Lauren Coleman and his past. And, there's a few hidden messages in the film beyond, the ones that are expressly stated. I mean, there's a very specific reason why the movie ends on the frame, the little boy running off. I mean, there's a reason why the movie ends on that frame. And this is the first movie where I was like, you know what? I'm not going to expressly state every single thread, every single thought I'm having about history or whatever. I guess I've actually talked to some people who felt like the movie didn't have enough of a philosophical slant, which to me is really interesting because I think it's probably the most philosophical if you really start to pull it all the various threads.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of subtext that I've put in the movie as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things because giant birds are always sort of portrayed across all. There's so many cultures that have these creatures in their mythology and history that there always seems to be some kind of spiritual attachment to making these creatures almost deities, as it were.
Right.
It's not just Native American. I mean, giant birds turn up in Egyptian mythology, Persian mythology, Mayans, Norse, Buddhism, African. It's one of the things that seems to touch every continent, that there is a reverence or perhaps a quite well-established fear of such creatures. But these stories go back, millennia.
Yeah, for sure. And we, like one unfortunate aspect of what we do is the fact that we are so constrained by the budgets that we have. So if I had an unlimited budget, we would not be, or even a budget slightly above what we did. And by the way, this is the most expensive movie we've ever made, by a long shot. Actually, it's far and above, most of the other films we've made. But even having said that, at the end of the day, you're up against a wall of like, we can only spend this much money, and we basically have 5 days to travel to Alton and shoot the movie.
Yeah.
So if I could have really, had more money or whatever, there would have been more time for me to try to find some Native Americans to represent the cultural side of the story. And there's a reason we don't delve too deeply into Native American beliefs relating to Thunderbirds in the movie. I mean, Chad Lewis briefly mentions it.
Yeah.
I believe Ken Gerhard briefly mentions it, but it's kind of skimmed over. And the reason is, like, I just feel weird about having a bunch of white dudes talking on behalf of actual Native Americans. So in the future, if we can ever revisit this topic, I'm sure we'll hopefully try to get someone that can represent the actual Native American beliefs relating to these birds, and actually we'll delve into it a little bit in the Mothman Legacy, and we do have someone that will be able to speak a little bit more from a first person perspective. But that's a tightrope. I mean, that's a tightrope you have to walk too, because you can't leave out the importance of Thunderbirds relating to Native Americans, but you also don't want to just have a bunch of talking heads speaking about things on behalf of people.
Yeah, but fair play for you for not doing that, because it's not stopped plenty of people prior, really, has it?
Sure. No, I mean, no, and relating to it, it's interesting because someone had actually called me out about this not that long ago, and that's why it got me thinking about this particular subject and whether or not it is something that I am guilty of. And I'm sure there is some element of like you could have done more. But at the same time, I've always been very aware of not speaking out of turn or having other people in the film speak out of turn. If you look at something like the Bray Road Beast, where we did delve into some of the Native American folklore relating to it, although obviously it was pulled back considerably. I mean, we did have Ricky Sanchez has a Native American lineage, so he was able to speak on it. But for the most part, we have unfortunately had to sort of restrain ourselves from going too deep into those topics. So my big plan for like 2020 especially is to hopefully fully, head in that direction, get some people who can actually speak with authority on those subjects. But I mean, this is kind of going off down a rabbit trail, but I mean, another problem not problem, but another similarity between like Bray Road and Terror in the Skies is the lack of original witnesses that we were able to really get, and it's one of the most irritating parts of what we do for me, because we made our reputation, or build our reputation, as being the guys who interview original witnesses, and that's what we do. But there was also there seems to be a lack of understanding as to how we actually managed to do that, and it's very similar to how we've managed to build a business based around making movies about a subject we love, and that is a lot of dumb luck. Yeah. And then like, because you cannot. There are people who do not want anything to do with these stories once they've lived through them. Yeah. And unfortunately, when it came to this one, that was one of the obstacles we ran into. Is a lot of the people. We had 4 original witnesses lined up to be in the film, and all but 2 are actually in the film. And that's because once we got down to Illinois, we had 2 drop. So that has been a challenge now for the last 2 movies, starting with Bray Road, Terror in the Skies definitely, and then Momo, to an extent, we ran into that problem as well, although we got some killer interviews lined up for Momo that were kind of unexpected. I didn't know what to expect of the interviews we were going to have in Momo, but they ended up being some of my favorite interviews we've actually shot.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that's because, like I referred to at the beginning, it's one of those subjects that invites probably more ridicule than any other? I mean, there are some strange sightings and creatures in the world of cryptozoology, but, as you look into, I mean, the prime example is probably Marlon Lowe. And we spoke about this the very first time we spoke, when we were talking about people like Sandra Mansi and stuff, when they put themselves above that parapet and say, right, I'm going to put my hands up here and tell you what I've seen, and I don't care what happens. It seemed that the Lowe sighting, I mean, I've seen some really disparaging things written by certain people, certain skeptics, about Mrs. Lowe especially, which I found completely unconnected to the...
Are you talking about like the drinking?
Yeah.
Because that's the most common. Yeah, it's interesting because we experienced this firsthand in Lawndale. We got into town on a Sunday afternoon, and we met a local. He actually came riding up to us on a scooter, and I didn't know what to expect. He turned out to be a very nice guy, and he filled in a lot of like history relating to the town that I thought was really cool. But he, in the 5 minutes we spoke to him, immediately blasted the Lowe family as being drunks, and like all this stuff about the family itself. Now, whether he's an actual local, he went to school with Marlon, so I don't know if he's speaking from some sort of experience. I also don't necessarily know how. The problem with they're a drunk or they're a pothead thing, those come up constantly when you're investigating or researching any of these sightings. That's the most common thing you'll hear, is that someone was drunk or high. Yeah. And I just don't know. I don't know what to think here. I do believe that the family would have had, as I always say, I think the family would have had much more to lose by coming forward with their encounter sighting than if they just kept it to themselves. So I have serious doubts the family were simply drunk and imagined some giant birds.
I mean, it's just, like you, that's always frustrating, because if you work on that principle, every single person that ever sees anything is either, like you say, either a pothead or they're drunk.
Sure.
I used to run pubs. I've never in my life come across anybody who is just a normal social drinker who has hallucinated under any circumstances.
Sure.
So I don't understand where this "oh well, you're drunk, you see things" comes from. It's like the old films when you see somebody sees something ridiculous, and it's usually a bum laying in a gutter somewhere with a bottle, isn't he?
Mhm.
And something strange happens in front of him, and he looks at the bottle and he throws it away. And it seems as though that's passed into common culture that's the general assumption, but it's in extreme cases of both alcoholism and drug addiction do hallucinations occur, and they certainly don't tend to occur in standard social drinking or standard social marijuana smoking. They're not connected in the slightest. So either everybody that sees something is a hardcore drinker or just quaffs absinthe, or everybody's on some super strong skunk from somewhere, and it just sends them on a different level because it doesn't tally.
Yeah, no, no, for sure. I've always thought that was a very weak way of refuting eyewitness testimony. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, to go back to your original question, I don't know if it's difficult to come up with, witnesses relating to this particular subject because of the ridicule factor. I do think there is a very strong ridicule factor when it comes to something like sightings of like a pterodactyl type creature, like any kind of like. I think there's a line you can walk maybe when you're talking about seeing a giant bird, with a 15-foot wingspan, where people are like, okay, well maybe, maybe that's a little more believable and they'll be a little more accepting of it. But when it comes down to something like Kyle Danhausen's sighting of the giant prehistoric type creature that he saw flying across the sky, I know the ridicule for him has always been, and Kyle has such a great attitude about it that he kind of laughs it off. Like I don't think it makes any difference to Kyle that people make fun of him. Yeah. Like he saw what he saw and he knows what he saw. And Kyle knows birds and knows animals, and he knows he did not see a known bird. And Kyle's one of the most believable witnesses I've ever spoken to.
Yeah.
Just because he's so well acquainted with the outdoors and knows so much about it. But he did, he talked about the ridicule that he faced after the fact. Yeah. And I don't know if that's simply because he was basically, relating that he had seen a giant dinosaur, or if it's that he just saw something strange in the sky.
I mean, it's interesting when, like you mentioned, because I think the other chap who basically sees something similar is Jeff Bayers, and he seems still quite emotional about his sighting. It's kind of though Kyle's made his peace with what he saw. He knows he's an experienced outdoorsman. He knows that he saw something different. As far as he's concerned, he doesn't care if you don't believe him. He's fine. Whereas Jeff still seems very shaken by what he saw because he can't seem to get his head around it at all.
Yeah, I think Jeff seems more. There was a weird vibe that Brandon actually translated very well in the music of that scene, and that is that Jeff doesn't seem scared by what he saw or anything like that. He was more. I think he was wowed by it. I think that event is what sort of set Jeff off. Like, I think that's the event that sort of opened Jeff up to a lot of these subjects. I mean, he's involved in Bigfoot research and things like that now. Yeah. And obviously does the creature replica toys. But yeah, Jeff, I didn't even know Jeff had a sighting. It was Ken Gerhard who told me. So I had been pretty far into the planning of making this movie before I realized Jeff was a witness. So Jeff ended up in the movie based on Ken's recommendation, which was funny because I've spent a lot of time with Jeff. Jeff and I do a lot of the same events together. We've hung out, we've taken long walks to get donuts. And somehow this had never come up. So I thought that was kind of funny, but, yeah, both of them have distinctly different sort of, feelings about what happened to them.
I mean, like you say, it does seem to be I suppose the saying could be beyond the pale when you start to get into the realm of dinosaurs, because it's a dinosaur, and outside of America, there's probably obviously Macaulay Mbembe in the Congo, on the west coast of Africa, and then the only other similar kind of report you get is what's known as the Ropen, which is down in Papua New Guinea, and that's that's essentially supposed to be a pterodactyl.
Sure.
So, and that once again, completely dismissed out of hand. There's no fossil. How can anything that supposedly died 65 million years ago possibly even survive at all? So it is odd, but clearly these people saw something that they just didn't recognise. Yeah,
Kyle. I mean, it's frustrating for me having my typically skeptical mindset because it's actually pretty easy to write off a pterodactyl as being like an existent cryptid for someone like me, and then you talk to Kyle, who's a wildly believable eyewitness, like very, very believable.
Yeah.
And this guy knows what he's talking about, and I have no easy explanation for what Kyle saw, especially because it flew fairly close to him. He had a very, very clear look at the thing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's like you say. It is one of those that you just go, well, but he's completely sincere in what he saw. So
sure. Yeah.
You've got to give him the credit firstly for being honest about it, and then take him at his word, really, because he seems a very sincere gentleman about the whole thing.
Yeah, and definitely hasn't gained anything from it either.
Well, do any of them?
No.
I think that's the, we assumed and worked on that principle a long time ago. I think, Seth, that these people are far better people than I could ever imagine, because I just couldn't put myself out there in that regard.
Sure.
So, going back to as we referred to very quickly, I mean, the thing I didn't realise about the low attack was the effect, because I think Lauren Coleman mentions it, that he'd gone from being a red-headed lad to a grey-haired teenager, essentially, hadn't he?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Lauren made that observation, and that was one of the statements that informed the entire tone of the movie. The movie has a very sort of like melancholy tone, and even with like Brandon's score, Brandon had a hard time initially kind of coming up with the sound of this movie, and I kept pushing that word melancholy on him, like especially like the Lawndale song, the song that introduced you to Lawndale. I had talked about that word as being, like indicative of how I wanted the movie to feel. I wanted it. The other word I'm hearing a lot is like haunting. A lot of people say it's a very haunting sort of score, and tone to the movie. So either of those work, but that was definitely informed by Lauren talking about Marlon sort of being dramatically affected by it the rest of his life, and it's fairly easy to find out what happened to Marlon. Like if you go out there and you look up Marlon Lowe on Google search, you'll find out where he's at today and how he's doing, and you can learn a little bit more about him. I was disappointed we could not get him in the movie, for sure, because that would have been one of those interviews that really, helped tell the story, especially on a personal level.
Yeah, I'm sure I saw him interviewed several years ago.
He's in
the
Bird. It's Monster Quest. He's in the Birdzilla episode of Monster Quest.
That's it. I knew I'd seen him interviewed on something, and I was trying to find it the other day, and for some reason I couldn't get hold of that episode of Monster Quest because I was convinced it was that.
Yeah.
And he I mean, I think that's 10 years ago, when that interview was done. I've never seen anything from him since. And once again, the family came out there and they were absolutely ripped to pieces again. Even in that episode, because I remember I think it's Joe Nickel who's the skeptic on it, and he just basically destroys him. Yeah,
it's a strange thing. What they recounted seeing is so specific, and they were backed up by the other by more than, it wasn't just Marlon and his mom. There were
Yeah.
other witnesses there that backed up what they said. And so I don't quite understand the pushback against the Lows.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because the other two friends both completely 100% back the story up, and there is no reason for them to do that.
Right. Yeah. It's a strange thing.
It is. I mean, what I've always found strange about the dismissal of Marlon Lowe's story is that over here in Europe we had a very similar incident that happened in Norway in 1932, and I don't know if you came across this while you were doing it, but there was a young girl called Svanhild Hansen who was picked up by a giant eagle, allegedly, and she was carried into the nest, and the villagers rescued her.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in all the press in 1930. It was a worldwide sensation, this story.
No kidding.
And they were, the mayor and a local biologist, everybody said 100%, absolutely guaranteed happened.
No kidding.
Yeah, I'll send you the link later.
Yeah, I'd love to read it. Yeah, Alison Jornlin actually just sent me another article recently that related to a child being picked up by some sort of large bird from Illinois. So, there's the one we related from Missouri, but apparently there was another from Illinois that popped up.
Yeah. I mean, it is odd because I've seen eagles have a go at most things. Mm-hmm. And I know there was a big spate last year of loads of people. I'm trying to think if it was in California. There was loads of domestic pets started disappearing, and nobody understood what was going on. Mm-hmm. And they suddenly realised that there was a pair of giant eagles in the area, and they were basically just swooping down into gardens and taking dogs.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, what? As though they didn't understand that at the end of the day, if an eagle's big enough, it'll have a go at anything.
Sure.
So, a small child to that is essentially the same as probably a fawn or something that just thinks, I can have a go at that.
Yeah, and I mean, there's the fact that the wrinkle in the whole thing is the fact that the Lows, were insistent that these things that they saw essentially were like an Andean condor. I mean, it had the rough around the neck, the plumage around the white plumage around the neck, and what they described seemed to be a condor, which is super bizarre, obviously, because you're in the wrong country. Yep. for what they were describing. You're in the wrong place.
But then again, we look at creatures all over the world, and animals have an innate ability to adapt to their environment probably far better than humans can. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility that a pair escaped at that point. Why not?
No, I don't think when it relates to the sort of like Thunderbird subject that we explored in the film, I don't think any of it is all that bizarre or unbelievable. Obviously. I think that's the part of the movie that is probably the most easily sort of digested by a general audience, because I think they're going to have their eyes open to the idea of Thunderbirds as a believable phenomenon. Obviously, when you get into like flying humanoids and things like that, it gets a little more out there for some people, but that particular subject, the Lawndale section and the Alton section, to me is sort of the most believable of the whole bunch.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that you look at how large Teratons got as creatures, but I mean, you look at something like was it the Quetzalcoatlus, which was as tall as a giraffe.
Right.
Imagine that flying over the neighbourhood. I mean, dear me.
Yeah.
It baffles belief when you look back at, I don't understand. It seems that some people don't expect flying animals to even match anything we could imagine, when you see, things like Brontosaurus or Diplodocus on land and like your megalodons and things like that in the sea. And it's almost as if people don't expect it to have sized up in the bird kingdom either.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, this is these are believable because they did exist. You know, like of what we've talked about. Obviously, not necessarily the flying humanoids, but when it comes to the fossil record, we know some of these things did exist, or something comparable did exist, and that's why it's such a believable subject to me. That was what surprised me about it the most. Was it doesn't have to be looked at as some sort of paranormal or supernatural phenomenon. You know, those seem to be very believable cryptids. You know, like I've said before, this is, to me, obviously you'd probably leave out something like On the Trail of Bigfoot, but to me, this is the most cryptozoological movie we have made. It is very into the cryptid side of things, and obviously that changes toward the back half of the film when you get into, you know, some of the discussions being had prior to the Mothman section and then the Mothman section. But when it comes to the movie as a whole, it feels very cryptozoological, you know, especially with Lauren Coleman sort of hosting or leading viewers through.
Absolutely. Do you think that's probably, you know, and I don't mean this disrespectfully at all about any of subject, because, you know, me and you are both of the same bent of mind in regards to this. Do you think it's because this one's probably got the most footing in reality compared to some of the others?
Well, no, I think it's actually, I mean, that's probably a big part of it. You know, Champ actually probably could be in that same category as well, but I think more than anything, it's because this is the first movie that is a wholesale, like, full-on deep dive into a subject rather than one particular monster. Yeah. So you know, like, and I've actually seen some people say that this is the first time we've done a movie that isn't just about one monster, and my initial reaction is to say that's not true because Invasion on Chestnut Ridge, except Invasion on Chestnut Ridge, the monster is the ridge itself. Yeah. So this is really, like, this is sort of, you know, our first, if you set aside On the Trail of Bigfoot, which is a miniseries and it's different, you know, like, this is our first whole you know, deep dive into a subject rather than just a localized look at a particular monster. So this is really an introduction to winged cryptids as a subject, which is you know, maybe that's why it feels much more cryptozoological. I can't talk today. This is what happens when you call me and I'm in the middle of editing, and then my brain is still on, like, putting together a scene. But yeah, no, this to me, that might be why it's much more of a cryptid or cryptozoology, you know, based film over something like The Mothman of Point Pleasant.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, like you say, obviously, first part of the film's looking at the Alton Flap and obviously the lows, and then obviously the other, you know, moving across, looking at the other subjects, and then you dive into the recent upturn in what is supposed to be the Chicago's Mothman. And I think somebody, I can't remember, it might be Lauren Coleman, who seems quite rightly frustrated with the fact that this is being called Mothman. For one thing.
Dismissive would be a great way of putting that. And you know, like, for me, I had my own opinions on the Mothman stuff, but I didn't really want that to intrude into the movie at all. I wanted to let the investigators speak for themselves relating to the case. And, you know, I mean, there's a very specific reason that Tobias steps into the role of being I hesitate to use the word host, but that feels like the right word for it, during that section where he's kind of walking you through what the case has entailed and where all the different researchers and investigators stand on it today. Yeah. And yeah, it is a very tenuous topic right now. There was a bit of a brawl on social media about it over the weekend. So I mean, it seems like every time I turn around, someone's arguing with someone else about, you know, the Chicago Mothman case.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most interesting aspect of that particular segment is the polarization of opinion.
Yeah, and it also speaks to a different angle on the overriding theme of the movie is why do people investigate this stuff? Why do people get into these subjects?
Yeah.
And how and when? And the Chicago Mothman section is interesting because it kind of speaks to what happens, what can happen with an investigation that isn't necessarily as straightforward as something like the Big Bird flap of the 1940s or the Lawndale stuff, where you end up in a situation where everyone has their own opinions on it and none of them are going to agree about it, and things can get a little heated when it relates to the subject. And there is something to be said for Tobias's innocence when it comes to why he is into these subjects and why he investigates these things. Tobias, I think my read of him anyway is that he is there solely to maybe find the truth for himself and learn from the witnesses. Yeah. And that is sort of his motivating. That's what's motivating him. Yeah. And in a way, I think it's interesting because the three main characters in the movie are Troy Taylor, Lauren Coleman, and Tobias. And Tobias doesn't come in until like 14 minutes left in the movie, but you can see elements of all three of those guys in the little boy that opens the movie as well, which was, like that was part of the idea behind that opening scene, is that you're seeing, maybe you're seeing a version of each of those guys in that kid.
Yeah, very much. I think that's the one thing I think that constantly drives my interest in the subject is I remember how I felt the first time I saw the Patty film. Mm-hmm. And whenever I delved into the remaining other aspects and tangents of cryptozoology, every time you come across certain things or certain stories, it seems to take you back. Mm-hmm. Like you say, to the beginning of the film with the child-eyed wonder and innocence of coming across such subjects for the first time, or really when you really delve into a subject or a witness or a piece of footage or something, it just takes you away, I think.
Yeah, and the the melancholy of the movie is informed by the fact that the final shot is supposed to be indicative of what happens if no one tells that story. Yeah. If someone has an experience and never tells their story, how that story will die. There's the last batch of movies we've been making are all about storytelling. And I don't know if I don't think that was necessarily intentional to just keep revisiting that subject, but that is where we're at. Like if you go back to basically the Mothman at Point Pleasant, and probably even into Boggy Creek Monster, which talks a lot about legend, like they're all dealing with that idea, storytelling and why we tell stories the way we do and how we tell stories the way we do and what happens to real events when they're sort of echoed over time as a legend. And this one is firmly parked in that same subject. And Momo is going to be even further into Momo's the most meta sort of look at storytelling that the movie's going to open with Small Town Monsters posters on a wall. Like it's that far into what we do. So this is a subject apparently that we're very interested in exploring right now.
Yeah. It certainly sounds fascinating, but it is. Obviously Tobias has over the last 2 or 3 years, and obviously you mentioned him right at the beginning of the film, Lon Strickler. Mm-hmm. And obviously probably the two hubs for these particular sightings, and as long as I've been following both, because I think I'm a big fan of Lon's work, and I love the Singular 40, and I think it's a cracking site. It's there's some fantastically researched and written articles on there from both Tobias and his partner. So it is interesting that as we refer to sometimes, occasionally you will get certain people that just become synonymous with a particular incident or cryptid, and it seems that for Tobias and Lon, that's their rack to hang their hat on at the moment.
Sure, yeah. I mean, for Lauren early on, it was probably Bigfoot and the Dover Demon and Enfield Horror, and like Tobias is very firmly parked in the Chicago Phantom universe.
Absolutely. Well, it was. I mean, it's lovely to see Lauren because I consider him an American treasure, really, especially in the field of cryptozoology, and I think. He's like the godfather of it all, really, isn't he now?
Sure, yeah, definitely.
So it's out 7th of June, but you're obviously, as you referred to a couple of times, you're working on a Momo film. So where are we with that? What's the theme, and what can you tell us about that?
We have Momo coming probably late September, very early October. It is a narrative retelling of the Momo events that also has documentary elements as well. There's a documentary and a narrative film, and they coexist. And I really can't. There's a very specific way they coexist, but I don't want to say too much until the first trailer drops, and it should be pretty apparent how they're going to coexist when the trailer drops. All I can say is if you are someone who grew up watching like 1970s cryptid and paranormal content of any kind, like In Search of or Mysterious Monsters or any of that stuff, or you grew up watching drive-in movies, or maybe you're like me and you discovered it later in life and realized you loved it.
Yeah.
This will be your movie. Like, it is in some ways it's a bit of a homage to the Legend of Boggy Creek in terms of like how the story is being told, but it goes pretty far beyond Boggy Creek as far as it's not simply a series of unconnected vignettes. It's a very much like a family drama about the Missouri Monster that is told in a very over the top outlandish fashion, which is then sort of corrected by the documentary. So you'll it's something we did. It's similar to how we told the story in the Flatwoods Monster, where you kind of are seeing the legend play out, and then you're also hearing it contradicted by the witness testimony. I think this is going to be pushing that idea to a very far place. I've never seen a movie sort of do what Momo the Missouri Monster is going to do. It is a loving tribute to 70s drive-in grindhouse movies, and hopefully a tribute to the Harrison family and the people from Louisiana as well, because we're trying to walk a very tight rope with this one as well, where we're telling the most you know what? It would be like if you watched. It would be like, I'm trying to think of like one of these films where they just make the most ridiculous, over the top version of what actually happened, and then there's a documentary that comes out around the same time. It would be like Caligula. It'd be like if someone made Caligula and then within Caligula, there was also a documentary setting the record straight about what happened. That's exactly what it would be like. So we are very excited about it. We've got Bobo and Cliff in the movie. And Elizabeth Saint has a cameo role. There's a girl named Janet J who plays a role in it as well. She's part of a late night horror duo called The Mummy and the Monkey from here in Ohio, which you'll understand why we went that route when you see the movie. Lyle Blackburn is in the movie, playing sort of a cryptid host. He's supposed to sort of be like a late night horror host. So, I mean, it's weird, man. Like I can't express to you enough how weird the movie is, but, people are probably going to feel like it is very, at least when the initial trailers come out, they're probably going to feel like it is very far from anything we've done. But I feel like it is very much dabbling in the same sort of subjects and themes that we've been dabbling in for quite a while. So I think for some people it might be the quintessential small town monsters movie. I've told someone the other day I could see some people coming away from Momo saying it's their favorite Bigfoot movie, because it is tailor made for anyone who grew up on Bigfoot in the 70s.
Excellent. So is Lyle channeling his inner Peter Vincent then? Is he?
Bright Night? He was pushing. He talked a lot about In Search Of and Leonard Nimoy. So I think it's much more in the Leonard Nimoy, Peter Graves camp. But you'll see, man. The first trailers come out, and it's gonna turn some heads.
Oh, I mean, I'm really looking at, as with anything, I've seen how, the behind the scenes footage and how the team are going along with it. So it looks really interesting, that what you're trying to do, and it obviously you're trying to shake things up a bit and do something slightly off the wall with it, I suspect.
Yeah, for sure. It's the question during the writing of the script was, how far can we push this? I mean, there was a lot of debate about whether or not we should have, well, I don't even want to give too much away, but there was a lot of debate during the writing of the script about how far we could push the idea of making an outlandish version of real events. So you'll see, like I said, the trailer comes out and people are going to they're either going to love it or hate it. It's going to be one or the other.
Yeah. Well, fair play to you. I mean, it's very easy, to be honest, Seth, when you because obviously you garner some fabulous feedback. You're building a depending following. Look forward to every release, and it seems to be growing. And obviously, I think the Beast of Bray Road probably was the first one that caught the attention, the mainstream, because there was a lot of reviews on places like Dread Central and things like that, which I think was kind of uncharted territory for you guys, wasn't it?
The Mothman.
Mothman as well, yeah.
Mothman, yeah. The Mothman's actually the biggest thing we've made. Bray Road seemingly had a lot more attention on it, but it actually, Bray Road sits behind On the Trail of Bigfoot at this point. So it was the Mothman that really opened us up to that mainstream, especially the horror audience. I mean, it was nominated for a Rondo Award and all kinds of stuff. So that was the one that seemed to be a little bit more mainstream. But yeah, that it's been crazy to watch the audience grow. It's been something.
I mean, it is as well, because to think, what are we now? 4 years?
Yes, yeah. It's actually 5 years since the beginning of starting to talk about making Minerva Monster, and then I think July will mark the 5-year anniversary of when we started shooting Minerva Monster. But 2020 is going to be the official 5-year anniversary.
Yeah, I mean it's got a momentum all of its own now, Seth. I think you've created your very own monster here with this. So, obviously, Momo, you're looking at later on the year. So, are you taking some time off? Are you just going to cool your heels and get Christmas out of the way? Because obviously, we know you've got a couple of things lined up already for next year. I mean, are you?
Oh yeah, no.
Are you going to take put a break on things for a little bit, or are you just going to dive straight into the next one?
Yeah, no. There's no break. I'm editing Momo, and I start shooting On the Trail of UFOs in the next month or two. With Shannon Legros, and then we'll be following. 2020 is the big 5-year anniversary, so we'll be working on the Mothman Legacy and the Bell Witch before the year is out.
Yeah. Well, I'm really looking forward to that. And obviously, you told me a few months ago who'd be hosting it, so I've been sat on that for ages. I sent Shannon a message just saying congratulations, because I'm sure she'll smash that out of the park. So are you doing a serial with that then? Are you doing the same kind of thing you did with Bigfoot and Champ, or are you doing?
Oh yeah, definitely. That's going to be an episodic miniseries. I honestly, it was supposed to start filming like 2 months ago, and I the Momo process has just been so much more intense than I'm used to. So we're really trying to just wrap that up, and then we'll go into UFOs hopefully in the next month.
Yeah. So is that going to be kind of similar in the way that you kind of pulled together an all-star cast in the Bigfoot one? Or is is it particular cases that you're going to focus on, or is it just going to mix it up?
I think it'll be a little bit of a mix-up, but I'm much more interested in talking to sort of witnesses and letting maybe some newcomers to the UFO subject sort of help tell that story rather than your usual array of talking heads that have all appeared on Ancient Aliens and every other TV show in the last couple of years. I mean, that's the thing about UFOs that's different from something like Bigfoot. I don't think that anything existed like on the trail of Bigfoot, whereas there are very concise looks at the entire history of the UFO subject already out there. So we have to figure out a better way or a different way of telling that particular story rather than just redo what we did with On the Trail of Bigfoot.
Yeah, and like you say, it's a well-worn path. Mm-hmm. So it's probably, I would probably suggest it's probably going to be the biggest challenge for you to make it fresh.
Yeah, I would assume so. That'll be the hardest part about it.
Yeah, I mean, is that interesting that that's going to be the next project when you look at everything that's happened over the last couple of weeks as well?
I feel like it's the perfect time to do it. I don't know how informed by what's going on right now the series will be. I'm sure it will be. I just don't know how informed by all the major news coverage and all that kind of stuff it'll be.
Yeah, I mean, I was very fortunate. I spoke to Dr. Lynn Keatai last week, who's one of the key Phoenix Lights witnesses.
Right.
And we were talking about how there seems to have been a real momentum over the last 18 months, gone from anybody that talked about UFOs or aliens, possibly 2 years ago, you'd be put with the tinfoil hat brigade.
Sure, yeah.
And now we've got to somewhere where I'm not really sure what's going on anymore. Mm-hmm. It's very odd.
Yeah, it's a strange time.
It is. Well, like you say, it's probably perfect timing. It'd be very strange if something peculiar happens whilst you're filming it, sir.
Right.
So when are you planning on? Is that going to be out before the end of the year or?
No, that will be a 2020 release for sure, and probably, given the scope and scale of it, it's probably a late 2020 release rather than an early. I think the way 2020 will go is you'll have Mothman Legacy in the spring, and then you'll have Mark of the Bell Witch as our Halloween release. And it would not surprise me if On the Trail of UFOs becomes our first sort of Christmas time release.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, there you are again already. End of next year, it's done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not even going to ask about 2021. I'm sure you're already planning.
Yeah, we've got some things cooking.
You staying in the States?
Yes. Yeah, because the next trilogy sort of kicks off. So.
Oh, well, you do like your trilogies, so yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So, other than that, where can everybody find everything out, Seth? Release dates for Terror in the Skies? Please remind everybody.
Yeah, Terror in the Skies comes out June 7th, available on Amazon, Vimeo On Demand, and VidiSpace, and on DVD. And also, you can find all of our other movies on Amazon and smalltownmonsters.com and all that kind of stuff. And then On the Trail of .tv is the home online of On the Trail of, and our YouTube channel needs subscribers. So if you're interested, you can go over there and check out all the trailers, some behind the scenes stuff, and episodes of the official Small Town Monsters podcast, Monsteropolis, which we're occasionally uploading as a video show.
Brilliant. Well, it's fantastic. As always, thank you again for always taking time out of your day to speak to me. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Hey, thanks for coming back. That's the key
thing. Anytime.
So yeah. Oh, one thing I was going to ask. Sam Sheeran's artwork for Terror in the Skies,
Hmm.
absolutely incredible.
Yeah, yeah, it's stunning. And he didn't just settle for like the poster. He also did all the teaser posters as well. So we actually have five uh, Terror in the Skies posters by Sam Sheeran.
Yeah. Are they available to buy?
The official one will be. I have not yet talked to him about what the plan is for the prints of the teaser posters, but I adore all five of them. So hopefully,
Yeah. I was going to say because that for me also is what sets Terror in the Skies apart is the fact that Sam's clearly found a subject he was really passionate about because
right.
I was speaking to Sam a couple of months ago because he was digging into a couple of cases because I think we were trying to find some footage of the Low incident and he was looking for newspaper reports and stuff.
Uh-huh.
So he was clearly a man on a mission to get it.
Yeah,
And like you say, all five are just beautiful works of art.
yeah, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, it'd be nice if that's a set. Not that I'm giving you ideas anyway. Not telling you what to do. Anyway, listen.
Yeah,
Thank you again, my friend. It's been an absolute pleasure. All the very best with the films, and hopefully we'll speak to you later on in the year or whenever Momo's out, and hopefully have time for another chat at that point.
for sure. Thanks for having me.
Hey, my pleasure. You take care. Thanks as always, Seth.
All right, bye.